Welcome into Boxing Scene Today. Well, if you're a student of boxing history, you know the middleweight division, 160 pounds, has had some of the greatest fights and fighters all time when it comes to excitement, when it comes to activity, when it comes to knockout power. Well, they're just getting big enough to knock one another out at 160. But recently, it has been a division that requires some big fights. But it looks like we're going to get one. Erislandy Lara, of course, the Cuban boxer, a champion at 160, will be taking on Janibek Alimkhanuly. And it looks like it's going to be the co-main event to the Lamont Roach Isaac Pitbull Cruz fight later on this year. Some exciting movement at 160 pounds. To help me break it down, Jimmy Smith in studio with the champ, Chris Algieri, Paulie Malignaggi, joining us via Zoom. Chris, when you look at this, before I even get into the fight itself, which I think is going to be a good one, Erislandy Lara, before we went on camera, you and I were talking about how long he's been in the game. Made his debut in 2008. Maybe the best pure boxer of this era, and that's saying a lot.
I mean, pure boxer who has transformed himself into a pure puncher, apparently. Since he's been fighting at middleweight, he's scoring first-round knockouts against, not the most descriptive opposition, but you mentioned how 160 hasn't been the deepest division as of late. But yeah, he started knocking guys out later. And we talked to Bob Santos about that, and he was saying, he always had power, but he moved more. Now that he's set down on his punches, he's not moving quite as much because he's got older legs. Now that power is starting to show itself, which you really need at middleweight. And even though Lara, came up from 54, had some really good big wins down there. I thought he beat Canelo Alvarez at 54, by the way. But it's now moved up to middleweight. It's turned out to be a good puncher at middleweight with not only respectable power but world class power. And this is an interesting fight. Do I think it's going to be the most exciting fight in the world? Probably not. But it's a really important fight for the division because of the unification.
Yeah, Paulie, that's just what I was about to ask you. 3 of the 4 major titles would be unified in this fight. Only Carlos Adames, of course, the outsider. This idea that things could be coming together at 160, is that where the excitement's coming from?
I think coming together and also, giving us, more of a clearer picture as to where this division is going to go. I think Adames might be the most dangerous guy at 160 myself. So I would love for the winner of this fight to be able to go up against Adames and maybe unify the division. Possibly Virgil Ortiz starts moving up to 160, as he's kind of hinted at. Him and Robert Garcia have hinted at in the past as well. There's things moving in this weight class that can at least make one happy. It's a good weight class as far as champions are pretty good. It's not anything that stands out at you and jumps at you. We've definitely seen way better middleweight divisions in our lifetimes. But I think if it starts to get moving a little bit like this, you can create some excitement because you can sort of start to bring in the element of surprise, so to speak. And the element of surprise is, okay, you get this unification, you get a winner. Are you going to get Adames? Is Virgil Ortiz going to come up? Is anybody else going to come up from 154? Is anybody going to insert themselves coming up the ranks in the middleweight division as a prospect going into contender status? You're looking for that changeover, and fights like this can sort of trigger that.
Or champ, or what about guys coming down, as in a Terence Crawford coming down from 168 to 160? If there's unification possibility, he might be enticed to actually do that.
Yeah, it's a good point. There's a lot of if there's a unified champion, Crawford wouldn't have to go through the champions one at a time in order to attempt to make that kind of history. So, it may lure him into saying, okay, you know what, there's already a unified title here, or there's, maybe even a possibly undisputed title. I'd like to, go for it. Who knows? I mean, if the winner goes up against Adames, you were talking about this amazing sparring session Crawford and Adames had, right? So, that could turn into a reality with a head-to-head matchup if the winner, obviously I'm looking at 2-3 moves ahead, but nonetheless, you start talking hypotheticals when it comes to these kind of situations, and the middleweight division suddenly starts to get a little more interesting than it has been recently.
I'm going to hit you, Chris, with a Gardikicism. My mom, her last name's Gardikis. She's Greek. One of the things she always said about somebody's girlfriend or somebody's friends, she said, water seeks its own level. She'd go, oh, his girlfriend's kind of trash. Water seeks its own level. That's what you would look at. She'd go, water seeks its own level. But this idea that things even out, right? And 160 is one of those divisions where some big names left, But things even out as big names go in, looking for the title opportunity. Does it create excitement, this kind of movement that we've complained about a little bit? 60 isn't what it used to be. But that draws people like maybe a Virgil Ortiz, who might be right in his physical prime. And folks, he's a big 154. We saw him in Fresno. That's a big boy. This idea that a unification draws names in. Your thoughts?
1,000%. Exactly what Paulie was just saying. And the frustrating thing about this weight class is, listen, granted, we've said it till we're blue in the face. It's a weak division historically right now. Right. But if there's a division that's weak, why is there not a unified champion? If there's one guy who's a standout guy, or if we're trying to figure out who that standout guy is, you feel like in a weaker division it should be easier to make happen. So that's where the frustration lies with this weight class for boxing insiders like ourselves. But now that we're actually getting some movement, we're making these fights happen, this looks to be like a little bit of a tournament. Paul, you mentioned Carlos Adames, which you would think the Adames-Lara fight would be really easy to make. Same promotions, same promoter. Make that fight, then the winner gets the Alimkhanuly fight. The Janibek fight. But now it's going the other way around. It's like, oh, you know what? The most enticing fight matchup is probably the Carlos Adames versus Janibek fight. But Lara is now going to go against Janibek, who I would favor Janibek in this fight based on age and experience and the weight class. And then we get to a final where it could be that Adames and Janibek fight, which I think is a very, very good fight. And I'm with you, champ. I lean with Carlos Adames. I think that he is a monster. I think he's gotten a lot better. He showed how good he was with the crazy draw that he got. And since then, that's even looked even better. So I think that this weight class is actually going to be pretty exciting now. And we have the options of potential guys moving up, moving down, because 54 is not that far. And when you have a bunch of killers in a weight class like that, some people might want to migrate. And if 60 is not that far up, it's another 6 pounds, and it's not the toughest division in the world. You got some really financially good fights that are available there. Why not?
Well, when you look at Alimkhanuly, Paulie, I got to ask you, what do you think of him? Young in his career, he's almost the anti-Lara, 17-0. We talk about Lara's experience, 2008. Lara was 8 years in when Janibek made his pro debut. This idea that at 17-0, a guy like Lara can present a lot of problems. He's a tough puzzle to solve. What's your thought?
Yeah, he's an older guy, so obviously there's always those veteran tactics. But again, Alimkhanuly he's from the Soviet school of boxing, so I don't know how many Chris, maybe you know better than me. This guy was one of those guys with tons of amateur fights.
Absolutely. I don't know off the top of my head, but he's probably one of those guys with 200-300.
No, I do think we have to start rating that. We have to start understanding that. When we talk about a guy only lost with 8 fights, like I see idiot fans, for example, talking about when they want to criticize somebody, or he lost to this guy who only had 8 pro fights. Yeah, like the same guy with 8 pro fights also had 1,000 amateur fights, dude. Right. You know what I mean? That actually matters, So we have to stop with the inexperience of the sub 20 pro record guys if they've had this kind of amateur experience, because this kind of amateur experience winds up with constant world-class opposition, because once you're at that kind of amateur experience, you're fighting for national teams, which means you're only fighting opponents that are national level from other countries or even your own country, so it's a constant high-level experience. So I don't know, these guys both come from a big amateur background. Lara is going to obviously older, so that's why you'd probably favor Janibek. But Janibek, I don't think is a spring chicken himself, right? So I mean, it's one of those things where there's going to be, I think, like Champ Chris said, it's not the most exciting fight, but there's a lot of chess here because these guys come from a very high IQ background, both in their amateur careers and it's spill over into their pro careers. And there's decent power there as well. Lara is getting some sort of highlight reel knockouts. We've seen Janibek do that here and there. That kind of thing is also not out of the question.
Yeah, but this idea, Janibek, by the way, 32 years old, extensive amateur career, of course, Erislandy Lara from the Cuban system, a world champion as an amateur himself. But Chris, I want to go back to a point that you make about the power of Lara late. And Lara, I called him at 54 when he was fighting at PBC, and he said, you watch, I'm going to start knocking guys out late. Well, I called Steve Farhood. I'm in the car. We're heading to the event. And I go, what fighters do you know of off the top of your head who became punchers later in their career? And he goes,
not many. Let
me get to my notes and get back to it. He goes, that is extremely rare. He said, well, Tommy Hearns was not a big puncher as an amateur, was a big puncher pro. Juan Manuel Marquez, more of a boxer early in his career, became a puncher later. those were the two names he came up with. It's very rare that fighters become punchers late. Lara's somehow done it. That's extremely rare.
Yeah, and our friend of the show, Bob Santos, alluded to that, and he said he could always punch. It's just because I always say that about punchers. Like, yes, a puncher is born for sure, but your style matters as well, and the way you employ that power, deliver that power, really matters. But you have a guy who at 54, Lara moved a lot. You know, he's moving. He was on his feet. He got great lateral movement. He would fire from his movement. That's what gave Canelo hell in that fight.
Good jab for a southpaw.
Great jab for a southpaw. You know, obviously again coming from the Cuban system, but at 60, he's just not moving as much, and he starts more aggressive in fights. That's why he has a bunch of early round knockouts. Granted, he knows what he has in front of him with a lot of those guys that he goes right after and knocks out. But also, Champ, you asked about Janibek. I looked it up real quick. 300 wins, 8 losses for Janibek in terms of the amateurs. So yes, one of those guys. Extensive.
Started at age 6, by the way. So
yeah, and he's a guy, Champ. I think you called a bunch of his fights. I called a bunch of his fights early on. So no, probably not. So he was a top ranked guy, and he's a bit of a puzzle. I've seen him early on, and I was like, this guy is the goods. And then I've seen him struggle, where you're like, where did that go? Where'd that go that I saw that? Then he doesn't make weight for a title fight. That's a big no-no. But also, I still think the skills are there. We're talking about the amateur pedigree. I've seen it in the pros. I've seen the power from him as well. And like you'd mentioned, Champ, you probably lean Janibek for, one, the age, but also the size. Janibek's a big 60-pounder. If he's having trouble making weight and he's one of those Eastern Bloc guys, you know, discipline's not the problem with those guys. You know, he's just a big guy. So I would assume that he's the bigger guy. He's the younger guy. You know, if they're gonna match skill for skill, I'm gonna go with the bigger, younger guy.
Yeah, but is it the idea, Paulie, that who's ever on this particular night, as Chris just pointed out, Janibek has had some up and down performances. We can say that about Lara throughout his career. Didn't always turn it up when he needed to. Could it be that idea of whoever's better on that particular night?
Yeah, you know, you favor Janibek, but if Janibek gives you one of these dud performances, you know, Lara has the craftiness to offset him, you know. So I think it's more important for Janibek to be the guy to really be on, because I think Lara, yeah, he's been inconsistent, but for the most part, you kind of know what you're going to get with Lara. You know, he can offset you, and he will offset you if you don't show up at your best. You favor Janibek because Lara is much older, but I don't know, man. I mean, if Janibek gives us one of those inconsistent performances that we've seen, you know, it's not out of the question that Lara here comes in and beats him.
And Lara never loses wide. He keeps every single fight close. You know, he's 60. We talked about him knocking people out, but other than that, like even the fights that he loses, or I mean, granted, he got robbed, I thought, by Paul Williams. He got robbed by Canelo Alvarez. But Jared Hurd was a close fight. Castano was a draw. All the fights that he doesn't get the win are very close. So if Janibek does have a bad night, and Lara keeps the fight really close, who's to say he doesn't win the fight?
And what does this add to you, Paulie? To a card, I think Lamont Roach versus Isaac Pitbull Cruz, I think it's already going to be a great stylistic matchup. To add this to the card shows a lot of confidence in this being a great night of boxing. What's your thought on that, Paulie?
Yeah, I like that. Also, we see Top Rank moving their fighters even without TV dates. They're continuing to do that. We've noticed that, and we continue to see that they slot them in other promoters' shows. And this one is an example of it. It looks like a PBC card, and Janibek is getting, you know, this big fight with the Lara and Unification. Solid card. Makes this fight. I mean, I was already excited for that Lamont and Pitbull fight, but this one makes the card all the more anticipated.
Well, you know, we'll be watching it, not just the fight, but the card itself looking absolutely outstanding for later in the year. Middleweight, one of my all-time favorites. It's getting hotter as the year progresses, as it makes news. We'll cover it right here on Boxing Scene Today. Join us, find out why millions are watching.